Hi, my name is Ed Binkley. This is a video tutorial series on combining human anatomy with, in this case, the anatomy of an insect, the anatomy and features of an insect, to create ultimately the fruit fly illustration. So I sent this rough to my art director for approval. Once the green light was given, then I hired a model and posed her in roughly the same position as the fruit fly, as the sketch, in order to make sure that I get the anatomical features correct. Now, there are really great tutorials on doing the actual figure drawing, and I'll leave that at this point to other people. But I chose a female model primarily because the fly himself is going to be very thin and elongated, and this particular model was ideal for that. And secondly, from a business standpoint, she was simply available on the tight deadline that I needed in order to get the sketch done and get going on the final illustration. To begin the illustration, I take the figure drawing and actually convert it to a series of silhouettes, a set of silhouettes based on individual body sections. Almost everything that I do is silhouette based. I start with a black silhouette and then draw lighter values into the silhouette, a technique that in our drawing classes we call heightened drawing. And I think it's part of what gives, I've been told that my images end up looking extremely three-dimensional. And I think that silhouette approach is largely responsible for that. So I create silhouettes for the individual body parts throughout the figure drawing, throughout the figure study. Partly so I can then repose them, I can move them around if necessary. I can make slight adjustments to the silhouettes. And as long as the silhouette remains credible, remains believable, I can then fill in the anatomical details later. So try to work very quickly at first, just creating the silhouettes and balancing the figure, considering especially that eventually the creature is going to have wings and it's going to be perched on top of probably a water pitcher or a jar or something like that, so kind of a precarious perch. But this particular model is very athletic and she's very good at holding poses like this. It allowed me to work as fast as I could, but still the figure drawing itself took probably a half hour to do. And once those silhouettes are in place on individual layers, the next step is to refine them and to begin thinking a little bit about the combination of human anatomy and insect features, at least the insect features for surface appearance and some textures. Now I want to take those existing silhouettes and do a couple of different things with them. I want to, number one, make sure that they start to become more insect-like rather than human, and I'm surrounding myself with reference material. Here's a shot of my studio as I'm working, and I create almost a sort of a cockpit of reference material around me at all times. On multiple screens, books that I use frequently, books that are my favorite anatomical references. In this case, references also of insects and other arthropod creatures, exoskeletal creatures. Notice also at the right end of my desk there is some standard equipment, a hand mirror, which you'll hear me refer to a lot in later videos. It's a very important piece of equipment, I believe, for any illustrator. And of course my William Bouguereau coffee mug. And once I have all those things around me and sort of filling my head with these images, then I go in and start reposing, using the silhouettes, reposing the existing sills to create more the impression, more the feel of the bug, the feel of the insect that I want. So I can change the pose slightly. I can elongate certain limbs. I think I end up elongating the hand in here and then clawing the hand around into more of a predatory kind of threatening gesture. Playing a lot with the angle of the head. The creature's going to be looking out at us, sort of gleeful as if he's really hit the jackpot here by flying in this open window and discovering a whole table full of fruits and vegetables that appear to be unguarded. So he's ecstatic over this. He's very happy about it. Now again, looking at some reference material, I want to start adding insectoid features, most obvious of which are probably the antennae. I'm starting to think now towards segmentation like an insect's body actually is, as opposed to a human body or a mammalian body. The head, thorax, and abdomen. Insect bodies are divided very distinctly into segments, and their limbs are strictly divided, unlike the overlapping anatomy that mammalian limbs have. In mammalian limbs, the tendons and ligaments that hold everything together across the joint, they have to in order to originate on the parent bone, the parent limb, and insert on the child limb. If you think of the hierarchy from the body core out as a parent-child relationship. So instead, on this creature, I'm starting to think in terms of actual sharp divisions between the body sections. Finally, when I get these silhouettes adjusted to the degree that I want at this point, I go ahead and increase the opacity on each back to 100% and take a look with lots of horizontal flips, of course. Take a look at the final result in silhouette form. Now the fruit fly silhouette layer set is in place in the background, and I went back in and refined some of the silhouettes in much more detail based on my insect reference material. I did add some spines along the legs and a couple of sort of flanges on the body pieces that I'm planning up here for the hip and the small of the back, the lower torso. But I'm going to use a little different organizational principle to work on the interior forms of these silhouettes. This file, this master file, is getting pretty cumbersome. I've got 3 large layer sets here: the background, which is the wall set, the fruit fly himself, and then the table and its contents. And within each of those sets are frequently multiple sets that have lots of layers in them, and the entire thing is getting pretty data heavy overall. So I'm going to instead work on the fruit fly himself as a smart object, which is an external file that is linked to the master file and comes in basically as a single layer. And to do that now, I'm going to save a copy of the fruit fly drawing. And I'll call it fruit fly SO for smart object. And now I can make the smart object file much more efficient than the master file. For the background, for example, I'll right-click on the walls set, the layer set, and tell it to merge group. The same thing with the table set. And I'm going to completely dump the wing reference for now, and then crop this file in to contain only the layer set that I need to work on. I'm going to leave some lateral negative space because I want to also import my figure study in here as a reference in order to work on the anatomical contents of the silhouettes. So that's cropped completely. I can very quickly now turn off the foreground and background layers as I need to. And in fact, I don't really need the table layer. What I really need is that background so I can judge values in context against the existing wallpaper. So I'm going to toss the tables layer also, and this becomes therefore a far more efficient file than it was. The big advantage being now I can reopen my master drawing. And on the master file now, I'll look under the file drag down to place linked. I'll find the fruit fly smart object. It comes in automatically in transform mode. I'll hit the return key to get out of that. And notice now in the layer palette it came in as a single layer rather than a layer set. And the icon tells me that that is a linked file. In other words, this layer is linked to an external file. And anytime now I make a change to the smart object file here, such as hiding the background layer for example, and save the smart object file, it automatically updates the link to the smart object layer in the master file. As soon as I click a quick save on the smart object, the background disappears in the master file. I'm now going to align that object perfectly with the existing layer here, and I need to zoom in order to do that. I want to find a small detail I can use to align that exactly. I'm in the mover tool, so I'm simply using the left right cursor keys now to move that around. And once that alignment is good, I can now completely delete the fruit fly set, group and contents. And back on the smart object, any change I make to this file, if that were painting that I wanted to keep, all I have to do is quick save and this file will automatically update the master. So with a little bit of multiple file organization, you can keep complex illustrations, complex master files like this far more efficient, and ultimately once you get used to the system, far easier to work on. I can then return to the smart object file and undo any changes that I don't particularly want, save the file again, and any changes of course will be reflected back into the master file. In the master file, I can make changes to that layer as long as they don't involve actual pixel changes. Once I get some value drawn into the silhouettes in the smart object file, I can then, if necessary, make value adjustments to the smart object layer in the master file. I can transform, do flip horizontals and flip verticals, rescale, anything I want to as long as I'm not attempting to actually change the pixels in the smart object layer. The first thing I want to do with the silhouettes on this smart object file is to do a foundation sketch into the silhouettes in a slightly lighter value, still very dark, but a slightly lighter value, that begins to combine human anatomical features with some of the insect look, the insect features that I want, particularly an exoskeleton look. To do that, of course, I need anatomical accuracy, so I'm going to take my original figure study and simply drag that entire figure study right into my master file, and I'll go ahead and merge that group once it's in here into a single layer. I can close the figure study now, and I'm going to keep that figure study in the master file the entire time I'm working on the anatomy on the creature. And one big advantage this gives me is that now, since I do a lot of horizontal flipping in order to judge anatomical accuracy and proportion accuracy, my reference file will flip with the drawing so that I'm still looking at relative angles and proportions. I'll turn the wall background back on and eliminate a little bit of the negative space just to make sure that the reference is not blocking anything I actually need to see. And I think I can afford to scale up a bit too. And finally, just in the name of efficiency again, to make sure I eliminate the excess on that layer that's hanging off outside of my picture plane in Photoshop, I'll simply hit Control A to select the entire picture plane, look under the image drag down to crop, and that deletes any excess on that layer that's outside the picture plane and simply keeps things more efficient from a data standpoint. Now once everything is set up to work efficiently, I start blocking in, I call it blocking in, the major 3D forms with a pretty dark value. This is a 70% gray painting onto the black silhouette. You want to be very careful at this point that you don't get lost in details. What I'm really looking for is light and dark major forms, major 3D forms, keeping the direction of the lighting in mind. The light will come from behind the figure, from our right. Lots of horizontal flips in order to keep myself honest regarding 3D form and the anatomy. And I'm beginning to think now in terms of these segments and sort of flange edges to the insectoid segments of the body parts, and how those separated pieces will overlap and the figure bends like this. And I really love doing this part because you begin to visualize in 3D for the first time. But do not let yourself get bogged down in details. This is fast work, very fast work. This is a time-lapse video. The actual drawing time here is about 5 minutes. So I'll continue with these other body parts and return when they are all blocked in. Now I've got the initial blocking pass done in a dark value on all the individual silhouettes, and I'll add temporarily add an adjustment layer here to brighten this up and show you the effect. Although I don't want it to be too bright, this is going to be a multiple pass approach where I start with a 70% gray and then work an additional layer on top of it at 50% gray and then 30%, etc. Gradually pulling the form up off of the flat silhouette. So I added some insectoid features in here, such as the repeating plates along the leg, obviously separating the upper and lower leg at the knee with an overlapping flange, separating the torso into two distinct pieces, one at the hip and then the upper torso, and started playing around with the blocking form into the head and face. And so far I'm pretty satisfied with how this is going, so I'll go ahead and toss that adjustment layer and then hide the reference file, the reference drawing, and the background, and do a quick save and update this into context in the master file. Now, I almost always, when I'm starting a human or a humanoid creature, I go quickly to the face and head in order to establish the personality as early as I can. Normally in an illustration I go from the silhouette to 70% dark gray and then to a 50% medium gray. But on the head I began to see certain things that I wanted to capture immediately. So instead I'm working here with about a 20% gray, very light value. And I'll return to the 50% medium gray for the other body sections and go in my normal sequence. I'm a strong believer, especially with fantasy creatures, in letting accidents happen. It's sort of a serendipity approach. And especially if you're working digitally on a layer, the worst thing that's going to happen is that the experiment doesn't work and you toss the layer and try again. So I try to stay very quick and loose with the drawing here while keeping an eye loosely on the face and head reference images that I've collected. And this looser approach has the added benefit of creating some really cool textural effects that may or may not last to the end, but at least they're suggesting things to me that I might not otherwise have come up with. So I'm concentrating constantly on creating 3D form and roundness, a sense of light direction and intensity, and watching for facial features beginning to suggest themselves. Anything that looks like it's starting to take on a human expression or personality. As I mentioned in a previous video, the fruit fly here is supposed to be thrilled at his own great good luck and doesn't even care that we've apparently seen him. So I'm looking for an expression that is sort of haughty and human at its core, but still feral and animal-like. Those teeth, by the way, were sketched quickly after I googled the phrase bad teeth, and I got some amazing and sometimes really disturbing images. So as always, you have to be careful what you search for. But anyway, the sketch worked after a couple of attempts, and I've now got some teeth with potential toward the finished image. I'm sort of getting the hang of this shiny exoskeleton thing, and I've been looking a lot at, in order to do these, on each of these body parts, I've been looking a whole lot at reference material on things like ground beetles and stag beetles, and any sort of insects that are basically dark value and have that sort of semi-gloss black look to them. And the texture on them is beautiful, and I've been trying to sort of imitate that texture, especially on the reflective areas toward the window, down the creature's back, and the back edges of even the forward body parts. Notice along the leg I tried to fade that effect as it moves forward toward his knee away from the light. So I'm now going to do the lower leg and foot, and I thought that would be a good opportunity to videotape this process. So the way I started it was to add a layer, and there's his lower leg and foot. So I'll add a layer and clip that layer to the silhouette layer, and then with about a 40% gray, and start with a fairly large marker brush and start adding on that clipped layer, kind of scribbly mark making and watching for, again, for happy accidents and allowing textures to happen. And I'm going to fade this effect up toward his knee again and fade it down toward the ankle as it goes underneath his thigh. But then based on my original figure study, I'm going to bring back some of that value. And notice I'm trying to sort of dab at this. I'm not using long, smooth strokes. I'm sort of using short dabs in order to increase the likelihood that I end up with texture. And then I'll play on that texture with the lighter value passes. Watch also for any opportunity to create skin folds, such as right there. But then I want to fade that lighter value toward the side of the unit that's away from the light source. Now switch foreground and background color and reclaim a little bit of the black in here to shape the ankle. And we'll take a look at her knee. Let's try adding a little illusion of the edge of the patella, and then back to the lower leg layer to continue that. There are separate layers, and I don't want to merge them yet. The second pass on this is going to be with pure white in order to get these reflective looks. And on this particular section of the body down here, I'm probably not going to add much at all in the way of pure whites and none out here toward the knee. I want that to be darker. So that first value pass, I'll add another layer on top of that, clip it also. You can add stacked clipped layers to a silhouette like this. And I'm going to switch to pure white on that layer. And looking once again, let's scoot the figure study over closer to the leg. And sort of simultaneously looking at the anatomical structure from my study over here and the light source coming from behind the creature, I'll drop in real quickly what would seem to me to make logical hotter highlights. I don't mind if I overdo it at this point. I think I'd rather overdo it and then back off of that. I'll show you how that's accomplished in just a minute. Let's go to a slightly smaller brush now. And once again, constantly imagining the light direction and how reflections would appear. Now, let's turn the figure study off for a minute so the values don't get skewed. If I decide that that white layer and the reflections, in other words, is too strong, I can always just lower the opacity on it. I can knock that back some, add an additional layer, clip it also, and add another pass at pure white, but in a more limited area. And that is completely non-destructive. So there's the last white layer, there's the previous, and the 40% gray. I think what I'll do now, and I did this frequently on some of the other pieces up here, I'm going to lower the opacity on the 40% gray, the base layer, and that has the effect of darkening the entire limb, darkening the entire lower leg, and also bringing out the spotlit areas in the upper two layers. I think I will commit to those two highlight layers. I like the way that's looking down there. And that gray layer is down to 70% opacity now. And that, I think, looks pretty good. Let's hide the background units and go ahead and save so it will update in the master file and see how that comes across. I think overall that's working. I really like the exoskeleton look. It's starting to look like an actual beetle here along the back, and I like what the foot is doing now. Probably add some more details to the what would be the toes down there if they were human. What would be the toes? But I like the illusion of the reflections that's creating, and also a slight illusion up here of some bounce lighting coming up off the table and the food sitting in front of him. So that I think is looking pretty good. I'll return to my smart object and go ahead and commit to these layers. In other words, merge them into the silhouette. Show the background again, and I'm ready to do the same process on the head and face to finalize that. And after that, I add the wing to the thorax. Now I'm going to finalize the value structure, the details, and the texture on the head. The rough sketch is, I like it a lot, and who knows, maybe this particular fruit fly has evolved to locate his food and or mates by echolocation. You know, that's quite possible. This is a fantasy drawing after all. And the core challenge here is to create something that maintains that look, that sort of exoskeleton look, but give it a human personality or to hang on to some of the human personality I've got in here from the rough sketch. And I found with my own work anyway, a lot of times when I refine a rough sketch into the finished product, I end up losing some of that personality. So to work toward that and create the look of a shiny exoskeleton that goes along with the rest of his body, but hang on to this expression, this expressiveness in his face, I'm going to first add a clipped layer on top of this, and I'm going to fill that layer with solid black. Then I'll add a mask to that layer. I'm going to lower its opacity until I begin to see the underlying sketch again. And then on the mask, I'll go ahead and completely reveal the teeth. I have alternate plans for the teeth in here, so I want to hang on to them entirely. And finally add another layer, clip that also to the head silhouette, and return now to my exoskeleton technique of earlier. And I'll begin by laying in this 40% value, following once again the underlying sketch, and trying to stay fairly sort of splotchy and sketchy with this. Every once in a while I can completely hide that black layer to take a look at the underlying sketch and pay attention to the portions of it that I want to keep. I like, for example, that really strong fold right across what would be his forehead. And let's drop to 50% opacity on the brush. And I really like the structure of the cheek coming down the side there, and the outside of the jaw also. Let's see what's happening under his ear. Not much that I haven't put in there. And this is a little stronger, that sort of plate where his eyes might otherwise have been. And he does seem to have the semblance of a lower lip there. So I'll add that. The structure that would be his chin, and a little bit, let's go to a larger brush and try to stay really splotchy and sketchy with this to create the semblance of the upper lip. Alright, we're getting there. Let's flip back the other way. Now remember, I'm also going to add a white pass on top of this to achieve the real reflective look. So this is a pass to underlie the hotter white reflections. Now let's start adding some of the structure on the darker side of the face. That original sketch had a kind of a balance to it, a balance and a personality to it. But it was simply too rough to try to refine and use as a finished product. Good. Now let's think about going to the grunge brush and see if that gives me a little better texture, kind of an organic texture. And the grunge brush does automatically create texture, but you can use it to delineate mass and form. It's just going to do so in a softer fashion than a hard edge brush or a full opacity brush. And it's starting to look a little bit pig-nosed, and I don't want that, so I'm going to soften that ridge right across the nasal area. Alright, and maybe a little more along the jaw to indicate a bit of reflected light. Good, and now let's go back to the black layer, and I'm going to lower its opacity gradually to see if I can get a mix of the two, of the drawing layer I just did and the underlying sketch. That's the drawing plus the sketch, and actually I sort of like that. So let's dump the black layer, and on the sketch, remember that's a clipped layer, on the sketch I'll add a mask and begin hiding portions of the layer I just drew in order to kind of reclaim the character of the underlying sketch. And if I bring back something that I don't particularly like, something from the original that's too harsh, for example, like right along there. I can just switch foreground, background color and bring back the drawing layer. Alright, pretty nice. I can still see the character, the underlying sketch. I really like how that the mouth comes way up into, almost forms a line, a dark line into the antenna up here. And let's darken that upper lip again a little bit. In other words, reveal the underlying sketch. And that I think is pretty good for a first pass for the head. So the second pass, I'll come back in with the solid white and play around with reflections in here. Alright, I've committed to the 40% gray layer, and I'm going to add another clipped layer to the head silhouette and work in pure white in order to create the reflections from the window, the exoskeletal reflections from the window. But I have to keep in mind too that the head is a fair distance farther away from the window than the back of his thorax and the hips. So I'm not going to be creating as much of a hot highlight on the head as back here. So I want to be a little bit restrained about that. So on this layer with 100% opacity, I'm going to add some selective highlights that echo what's already there, what I already see. And I'll keep it fairly splotchy and sketchy. In fact, let's go to a bigger brush. And I like that ridge coming up out of the antenna, traveling into the broad band across the forehead. And the reflections are not going to appear on his face below the ridge. The light is coming pretty directly from straight behind him from our right. So there aren't going to be any hot reflections down on his chin and lower jaw any farther down than the ridge of the trapezius right there. From his acromion process there to the back of the skull, the line of the trapezius is going to be right there, and that forms a light block coming across anything below right there. In fact, I'm going to knock off that reflection in more of a hard line, because the trapezius would be casting a shadow onto the face. That's better. That's pretty believable. Let's add one more layer and clip it and go to the grunge brush to sort of add texture to play up what already exists there. I'll be very careful not to lose the form, the 3D form on this. But I would like to smooth out a little bit of the splotchiness, the dark splotchiness. Come down on size on the grunge brush, and it allows me to delineate more carefully, more deliberately. And let's see if that helps or hurts. Do a horizontal flip. Maybe a little too much in here, so we'll erase that back. I'm starting to really like what the highlights are doing along here, and this highlight on his forehead is unrelated to the window, but maybe, there's a ceiling lamp in the kitchen where he's flown in or something. Anyway, I really like that and what it does to the 3D form up here on his cranium. Alright, that's nice. I'm going to commit to that and merge those two layers together and add one more layer to see what happens with the grunge brush if I reshape that extreme corner of the mouth. I think that's better. It's a little more of a semblance of a human mouth, a human smile. Now the other thing I want to do while I'm here is to take a look at the teeth, and I'm going to lasso the teeth and copy them up to their own layer, Control J, and I'm going to see if I can enhance the existing teeth just using levels. I don't want to burn them out too white, but I do want to bring up the middle grays some and possibly increase the contrast and the definition. I can paint back into them. Let's see first if this will get me toward what I want. Let's zoom out and take a look. I think that's pretty good, because remember the reproduction size on this is going to be much smaller than we see on screen. And I think I'm going to want that extra punch on the teeth, at least on the light side. So let's add a mask and mask out the shadow side. In fact, add another layer with 40% gray and paint out the shadow side. And I'll also use black to paint out the extremes. There's the original, and that shifts the impression of the lighting more toward the window. So light on this side, shadow on this side. As long as I haven't lost the personality, haven't lost the character that was there, that to me looks really good. So I'm going to apply that mask and go ahead and commit to everything. Merge that down into the head. And as a final detail pass on the head, I want to paint on the teeth a little bit more, so I'll add a layer. No need to clip it. I'm not going to get anywhere near the border of the head, the outer silhouette border of the head. I'll go with a fairly small detail brush, like a 10 pixel, and paint with white, and see what happens if I add some hot highlights to the individual teeth in here. And I don't want to go too far back into the mouth. You know, there are a few celebrities that have that kind of full width smile, almost ear to ear, so to speak, where you can actually see their molars. But I think that's sometimes creepier even than this guy is. And I don't want to overdo this. I just wanted some hotter highlights that give us a little stronger indication of the light coming from behind him. Good. I'll drop the opacity on this to add a bit more to these hotter reflections along his cheek, along the side of his head. And we'll soften that up a bit. I like how sharp it is right against the trapezius, right against the neck and the trapezius up here, but farther down that would diffuse a little bit and soften some. I like how this area right here grabs attention because of that shadow, but I didn't want that to extend too far down into his face. By the time we get into here, I want the attention to be on the teeth and the structure of the face and the creepiness that creates. And finally, let's try. So I kind of like what that layer is doing. Let's try duplicating it to double the strength of the effect. And that actually is pretty nice. All I did was duplicate the layer, and the doubled up effect really enhances the reflection along his face toward the window there. So I'll commit to that and merge down. And let's try one more duplicate with the merged layer. So I'm quadrupling the effect there to see what happens. I like that too. At some point I have to stop duplicating and eventually it's just going to go pure white. But I really do like that overall effect on his face. So let's merge that in, and I think I'll stick with that. Let's go to the master drawing and hide the background set. Do a quick save and watch the update in the master file. Yeah, I think that works pretty well. It works in context. The level of detail in the face now matches the rest of the figure here and matches pretty much the level of detail that's drawn into the surrounding objects here. Alright, I added some additional highlights to the side of the head toward the window, some highlights up on the what would be his temple, I guess, and the cranium along the top. I'm going to go ahead and add now his other leg. We would see the right leg on the other side, and I'm going to do that the easy way. I've got the three pieces that make up his near leg grouped into a single group. I'm going to duplicate that group, Control J, and then drag that group to the very bottom, therefore the back of the layer stack, below his hip, which is the bottommost layer. Then I'll right click on that and merge the group. And with the move tool, I'm going to move it so that to be in the correct perspective, I've got to account for the fact that he's standing on this jar, but the other toe would be visible a little bit out the other side there. I want it to be a little below the existing one. So his feet will be together. And then I'm going to free transform, move the pivot point to that intersection, right where his toes intersect, and rotate the far leg out so that we can see it. And because it is a little further away, then I'm also going to scale it toward the pivot point with the Shift and Alt keys. In fact, let's scale it down pretty dramatically, and then with the Alt key, scale it up on one axis to make it a little thicker. All right. Now I'm looking in a hand mirror to make sure I get the angle the way I want it. Right about there looks pretty good. I'm trying to avoid tangents. I don't want to create anything that aligns too closely. And right now I've created one where the top of his knee almost exactly aligns with that flange on his left knee. So I'm going to scale that down a little bit to open up the negative space in there a little bit more. Tangents are when the edges of two objects touch each other, but they don't either overlap or separate and leave negative space. And psychologically in our minds, tangents tend to destroy depth. So I'll commit to that, and that little bit of negative space that you see right in there now is enough to create a separation. We'll do a horizontal flip and see how that looks. Pretty good. Now I'm going to open levels on that other leg, and in levels on that leg I'm going to go ahead and darken it, see if I can hang on to some of the detail in there. I'm going to darken it substantially so that it appears to fall back and below the rest of the body. That's pretty good. I can still see some of the detail, some of the structure in there. And now I need to go to the forward lower leg, and I'm going to add a clip layer to that and get my 40% gray, and let's use the texture brush, the grunge brush. And I need to lighten the silhouette edge of that forward leg all the way down so that it really pulls up and separates from the other leg in the background. This is the principle of edge separation. Illustrators and artists try to be very aware of this and how one object separates against its background. Separates meaning pulling forward toward us, out toward the viewer. And I want this leg to pull forward and not get lost in that background. That might be undoing a little bit of the form that I so carefully created earlier, but I think overall the separation is going to be more important than maintaining the anatomical form down his tibia, down this particular body part. So I don't want things to get confusing, too confusing down there. In fact, I'm going to continue that texture right around the end of his toe. Alright, and I'll deal with the hand later. Let's turn off the background set and update the master file. And at this magnification, I think that works really well. Remember that this magnification is more similar to the way it's going to be reproduced in the magazine. So I kind of want to keep an eye on what details are doing and what separation is doing with that in mind. I believe that's the level of separation I want. A very fast way of creating the other leg over there. And I'll do a flip horizontal in context to make sure it's still working okay. I think that is pretty solid. I need to make an adjustment to the torso. This small negative space here along the abdomen bugs me a little bit. It's a little bit tiny and isn't really indicative of what the torso would be doing in a crouch position like this. And my figure study is not going to help me much on this because what I really want to repair is the chest area up in here. Right now it works as 3D mask, but it's anatomically not very accurate, and I want it to be a little more human. So I'm going to add a mask to the upper torso layer and do a horizontal flip to judge how I might improve that torso. I'm going to thin it out some, which also serves the purpose of opening up this negative space between the chest and the upper leg. Now the chest will taper slightly thinner up toward the suprasternal notch at the top of the sternum, what would be the sternum, and the clavicle, assuming a fruit fly might have a clavicle, it's going to come straight off of the acromion process at the top of the shoulder, and pretty much straight forward in a standing figure, a figure standing erect. In this case, he's leaning forward, obviously at about a 45 or 50 degree angle, so the clavicle would come forward at an angle perpendicular to that, and would land therefore probably about here. So the suprasternal notch is going to land there. I'm going to shave the chest off using the mask up to that point. And once again, being careful not to create too razor sharp an edge here. I don't want the edges that I create along this silhouette to be any different in character from the edges I've already established throughout the illustration. So at the suprasternal notch, there will probably be a slight indentation. Let's take out all the excess out here. And from there, the sternocleidomastoid muscle is going to form a straight line right into the mastoid process underneath where his ear should be. So right about here. So it's going to be a straight shot from here right toward that process, where the process would be. We'll round off the notch a little bit more and eliminate all that excess. And let's thin that out just a bit more. Thin the neck out a little bit more. Do a flip horizontal, and let's go ahead and add a mask to the, I believe it's the lower torso. Yeah, so that I can open up this negative space a little bit more too. I'll create an angle that would align with the chest up here higher, and let's shave off a little too much in there because then that allows me to switch foreground background color and create more of a sharp angle skin fold at that juncture there. Now let's go ahead and save that and let the master file update, and then use the history palette snapshots to look at before and after. So there's the current state, that's before, after, and I think that's better. That's more believable human anatomy and much more believable silhouette. While I'm here now, let's go ahead back to the head layer, and I'll add a mask on that, and let's shave off the chin a bit just to create a sharper angle where the sternocleidomastoid disappears behind it. And back to the upper torso layer and the mask there. I think I can come up a little more vertical on that too. Alright, that's good. That's more what I was looking for on the silhouette of the torso. Now this is a video to show you how I'm creating the wing for the fruit fly. I started by very painstakingly redrawing from my reference material the venation on a single fly wing, and then added a solid layer of black as a silhouette beneath that venation. And now on a clipped layer I'm using my fine grunge brush to add a white texture to it. And I'm going to keep this file as a master file because I'm not exactly sure what's going to happen when I start playing with layer modes on this. So I'm probably going to then eliminate the gray background and import this as a smart object into the master drawing. So I'll continue with this and let you know when I'm ready to bring this into the master drawing file. Now I've discovered that I can't bring the wing into the master drawing as a smart object because I need to be able to treat the two layers on the wing separately, the lines versus the membrane. On a smart object layer you can change the layer mode, but it does so of course for the entire smart object, and I need to maintain the full strength of the lines while manipulating the membrane to become transparent. So right now I have the smart object imported here. I'll go back to my wing drawing and I've grouped the two layers into a layer set, which I will drag into the master file and pre-transform it into place to match the underlying template. And I can now throw away the underlying smart object layer. And in the wing set now, on the membrane layer, I've discovered that probably overlay layer mode. It may be what I end up wanting. I'm going to close this file now, but I'm going to play around with that. Go back to normal mode, which is completely opaque, obviously. Then I can cycle through the layer modes and see what works best. Multiply mode is interesting. It does darken everything. So in multiply mode, remember, accumulates darks toward black. But it does allow some transparency, translucency in there. Let's see what happens if I reduce the opacity on the membrane. Yeah, that's not really giving me what I want. So back to layer modes. Screen mode with reduced opacity is pretty interesting, actually. I kind of like that. Alright, screen mode it is, I believe. So screen mode with reduced opacity gives me still the patterning that I want and the translucency. I think I'll stick with 40% opacity on the membrane layer. I'm going to load that layer as a selection. So it loads the contents of that layer as a selection and then add another layer on top of it with a mask. And that mask automatically takes on the shape of whatever selection is active. I'm going to get my grunge brush with white and paint some additional opacity into certain areas of this. And I'll also want to switch to black now and paint some black opacity into the root of the wing. Again, looking at my reference material, went reference shopping for fly wings. Flies, by the way, are classified as Diptera, the family Diptera, which means two wings, as opposed to other insects which have four wings. Flies have only two. Obviously, in a fantasy drawing like this, you can do pretty much anything you want to, but I like to humor myself that I'm being at least that scientifically accurate with this. There, switch to white, and let's add some highlight along the inner edge. Most of what I'm doing here is an attempt to continue creating edge contrast. So the front edge of the wing I want to contrast against the darker part of the torso, and the back edge of the wing I want to contrast against the lighter highlight area of the torso. In addition to that now, add one more layer. Load the membrane again as a selection, add a mask to that layer. So what I paint in will be limited to that shape, and now with solid white, I need to add opaque reflections. These membranes are not strictly flat. They do tend to rise a little bit as they connect to the venation in the wings. So I want them to have the appearance of rising just a touch, sort of rising and falling hills and valleys in between the venation. And this gives it more of a 3D effect. And again, as I move away from the window, I'll decrease the effect. Closer to the window, I want the effect to be pretty dramatic. And notice I'm constantly changing brush sizes as I create any kind of taper or gradation. So my offhand is just resting on the left-right bracket keys in order to quickly change brush size on the fly. I don't want any of that gradation to appear on the dark side of the veins. These spaces that are closest to the window with a much broader brush. and really enhance the membrane here. I want to work on this hand now. So back in the Smart Object file, I'll turn the background on again. And I do have a reference in here, a photograph of my own hand in this position, which I then also, in keeping with the body type of the fly, which is thin and elongated limbs, I then stretched the photograph of my hand just with a simple free transform. I'll use this now to do value blocking on the hand and arm silhouette here. So in the body set, it's on the arm layer. I have the transparency locked on that. I'll add a clipped layer on top of that. And because this hand and arm is going to be almost entirely in shadow, I'll probably only do a couple of value passes. We'll start with the dark value. Let's start with a value blocker and 70% gray, so pretty dark. And whatever light is going to be reaching him is sort of ambient light, leftover light from the window to our right. So I need to first imagine, by seeing these planes in the photograph, I need to imagine the light coming from a different direction here. My hand was lit from above when I took the photograph, above and toward us. So I've got to turn that now so that the light is coming from the right in this particular image. So we're going to see more light on these planes facing to the right, including there the structure of the small finger and the rest of the palm where it folds into the little finger. There's the ring finger and the middle finger. And I did remove the extended index finger on this. So we would probably see a little bit of the knuckles right there. I want to add a little value to the forearm so that it separates from that far leg, but just enough to create that separation. So very rough blocking on this first pass. Possibly then I want to hold that dark silhouette against the background, against the wallpaper, but I'll probably go ahead and add some structure, a little structure to the back of the hand. Little anatomical structure, and I'm going to stop right there. I think that's pretty good. I'm going to leave that layer in place in case I want to darken it, and I would darken it simply by lowering the opacity and add another clipped layer, come down to 50% value, which will probably be the lightest value I want, and let's go to a smaller brush to start brushing in details. I'll start with the edges that are closest to the light source. I want to be careful though with my value structure not to lighten it so much that the edge disappears against the background. And let's drop the opacity to 50%. I teach my college students to learn to draw hands so that you can proportion and block things in very quickly. But once that is done, always go to reference material. Reference material without anatomy study doesn't do you a whole lot of good. You become so completely dependent on the reference that the results are frequently substandard. But using reference material along with your study of anatomy and human body mechanics is the professional way of doing it. Now that overall structure is pretty good in there. Let's do a flip horizontal to make sure I don't see any strange imbalances, and now go to a much smaller brush, still with 50% gray, and hammer in some of the details. Look frequently away from what you're drawing as you draw. Draw with your peripheral vision, particularly important on anatomy. Right now, for example, when I'm sort of forming the wrist, I'm not looking at the cursor. I'm looking outside of the hand. I'm looking in areas out here in order to judge peripherally what the structure of the wrist is doing, if it looks realistic in my peripheral vision. So I'll frequently keep drawing, for example, here as I'm looking at the reference material here, and my peripheral vision is enough to frequently to guide me. I like that little turn right there, almost a horseshoe shape in the skin fold. So I'm going to keep that and then soften its transition out into the rest of the tissue. And I really like that little starburst effect right there. So I'm going to see if I can hang on to that. And one of those comes up, but I've got to remember I'm inverting the direction of the light, so the light is going to hit the upper surface here, not the lower. So I'll invert my foreground background temporarily and make sure I keep that shadow. Then switch again. Use the lighter value, meaning 50% gray, to define the shape of the fingers, but I'm not going to bring that lighter gray out too close to the wallpaper. And let the silhouette do the work, the work of describing form. And take a look, if you take a look at your own fist, make a fist and then look at the business end of it, the impact end of it, if you're talking about boxing. And notice that the space between your fingers does not come all the way up to the knuckles. It only comes up about 2/3 of the way like this. So the cutoff would be about right here between the proximal joint on the fingers against the back of the hand and the medial knuckle down here. So I've got to repeat that here also. And that may in fact be all I want to do on the hand. Let's hide the reference, hide the background, update the master file over here. And that's pretty good. In context, again, that may even be a little bit too light. And here again is the advantage of working on layers. I'm going to lower the opacity on the blocking layer and also lower the opacity on the final layer. And save again while watching the update in the assembly file over here. Alright, in context, that looks much better to me than the lighter. So that hand is finished. Total drawing time probably 3, 4, 5 minutes, so not too bad at all.